should I stop this?
Vision and digital transformation. And yeah, it's exciting times and looking forward to bigger and better times in IT and keeping more and more clients happy and secure.
Awesome. Thanks, David. We've also got Sean, and Sean knows Amplify because he's actually the regional leader of Fully Managed, which had purchased WAPO. So that's exciting business acquisition story in Calgary that more people should probably know about it. It's a really good COVID story and good success story. And we've also met Sean through being a fellow EO member and working in the neighborhood. He takes up almost all the space at Work Nicer, leaving little for the rest of us when we're members. So great to have you here, Sean. Tell us a bit about Fully Managed and yourself.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all here and share some wisdom with some fellow colleagues and yourselves. So I'm Sean Freeman. I'm as Jamie said, I'm the Regional Vice President for Alberta for Fully Managed. I actually founded a company in 2011 called TWT Group. You might know we were acquired by FM about 2 years ago, right before the pandemic hit. And I've been on that journey ever since. And yeah, we recently brought on WAPO and David's team in June. And yeah, so Fully Managed, what we're all about and why we got acquired is because our vision's really aligned. We want to really take IT services past just firefighting and basic security things that should already be kind of law to a point of digital transformation where they can use technology to be competitive in their industries. So yeah, nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Sean. And last but not least, Dominic was with us last year. He helped us kick off the whole concept of AHA with Amplify. Was one of our first sessions ever, which was the 2021 cybersecurity. And we're excited that he came back, and the response that we had to his session was very, very positive and helped us get the confidence to launch AHA, which is now over 700 members. So thank you for being such a huge part of that story. Tell us a bit about your company and yourself, and then we'll let you launch into setting the stage from a trends perspective before we jump into this quiz.
Sounds good. And Jamie, thank you very much for allowing me to be partaking in today's sessions. Really looking forward to it. So everyone, I'm Dominic Vogel. As Jamie mentioned, I'm based in Vancouver. I have my winter beard going, which would probably be better suited elsewhere in the country, but it does keep me dry this time of year. At least my face is dry. But I've been in cybersecurity close to 15 years, and CyberSC is my consulting company. It's an advisory firm that we started 8 years ago. I have clients right across North America, and we focus on really serving small and mid-sized business owners and executives in terms of making sure that they understand what cyber risk management means to their organization, helping them on that journey as they embark on various digital transformations as well. So that's us in a nutshell. I will pull up, as Jamie was saying, I'll pull up my presentation here. Just bear with me one sec. I'll spend just a few minutes here. Won't be too long. So in terms of sort of setting the table here in terms of cybersecurity and what we're looking at moving forward, especially for 2022. At its root, I often get asked, the why factor. Why do we do cybersecurity, right? Depending on who you ask, some cybersecurity people think you do security just for security's sake, but that's really not the case. At the end of the day, you're doing cybersecurity or cyber risk management in order to secure your organization or your business's growth. And at the root of pretty much every company's growth in this day and age in the digital economy is data, is that information. So that whether that be your sensitive data, whether that be data that's just only important to you, whether that be your customer data, at the end of the day, that data does have an intrinsic value to you in order to promote and to grow your company. One of the things that we always like to tell people is that cybersecurity doesn't have to be expensive, right? Just doing cybersecurity doesn't mean you have to spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Often, like good hygiene or the key to good health, it's about doing the basics and doing them well. And with that emphasis on doing that, that'll give you a strong foundation in order to build off that and mature over time. In terms of that, going back to that why equation, there's something in security that's referred to as the CIA triad, and it's not the Central Intelligence Agency, it refers to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. From that, like that data-centric approach to cybersecurity, thinking of these three elements is really part and parcel of how your organization should be approaching cybersecurity. So there's protecting your data from a confidential perspective. Like I said, whether that be sensitive R&D data, whether it be important data to your organization, it could be, again, sensitive client information, their social insurance numbers, what have you. Protecting data from a confidentiality perspective makes up one of the legs of that security triangle. Another one is integrity. Integrity doesn't get the sort of the airplay that the other two get, but again, depending on the sector that you're in, something like maybe financial data as an example, the integrity of that data is very, very important. If someone was to mess around with that, that could have a serious impact or consequences for your organization and for your customers as well. And the last one, and we're really seeing this one come into a flight right now, especially with the rise of ransomware, is the availability of that data. We hear from a lot of organizations who say, hey, we're a small company, we don't have anything sensitive or important, no one's going to come after us. But the thing that they don't realize is that data, their data, the availability of that data does have value. It has value to them as an organization, because many organizations can't operate with that without their key data for more than, if they go down for a few hours or a day, they can't access that data, they're going to be willing to pay to regain access to that. So that's something that, like I said, is really important. We're trying to paint this picture and the trends from a security perspective. I really believe, again, it's about reverting back to the basics and doing them well. Already sort of hinted here in terms of what that sort of security picture looks like. I'm a firm believer in taking a data-centric and risk-centric approach to cybersecurity. There's a lot of people who just say, let's take a blanket approach to everything. Let's try and just protect everything. But the problem with that is if you try to protect everything, you end up protecting nothing. Or another way that I refer to it as the Miley Cyrus paradox. If you protect your Miley Cyrus MP3s to the same extent that you're protecting your corporate crown data jewels, things that are absolutely vital to your organization, you're doing security wrong, you're doing it extremely ineffectively and inefficient as well. It doesn't make sense to protect data that's not as valuable to the same degree as the data that's extremely valuable. So that's, again, like what we're really seeing moving forward is there's going to be more of a data-centric approach to cybersecurity rather than just trying to always focus on protecting the computers, the servers, what have you. In terms of, again, what we're seeing and what we're projecting for this coming year as well is, again, is more of the same with the threats that we've seen during the pandemic. I mentioned ransomware. Ransomware is honestly a plague that's just it's ripping right through the small and mid-sized business community in Canada. We probably are fielding anywhere between a dozen to 2 dozen ransomware calls a week from different organizations right across the country. Again, the vast majority of small and mid-sized organizations are just not prepared to deal with that. And what's even more startling is that, and I know the good folks at Fully Managed would I think would appreciate this as well, is that you have really great IT service providers like Fully Managed, but unfortunately there's a very low entry to barrier. Anyone can call themselves an IT service provider, and what we've seen as a trend, this was pretty much ending sort of in Q4 for 2021, is that we've seen a noticeable increase in organizations that are paying the ransom to their IT service provider. Their IT service provider is getting hit by ransomware, and the service provider is saying, well, we're not really in a position to really recover here. How about we pay the ransom? And they're collecting money from their clients. And that's, like I said, a trend which has been extremely startling to end the year. And I'm projecting more of that in 2022. As well as, like I say, with the rise of remote work and more people obviously working remotely, we're seeing more and more what's referred to as account takeovers, whether that be for the remote access or email access. So important to lock that down with multi-factor authentication. I already talked about this. I'm already blabbering around too much. In terms of 3 big mistakes that we're seeing and we're expecting to keep seeing. The first one, again, is blind trust. I just had a post about this morning on LinkedIn. That blind trust is not good. What we see with a lot of organizations is that they just blindly trust whatever their IT service provider is telling them. Again, many of them are telling them the truth and good things, but they're not having enough constructive dialogue. right? And rather than blindly trusting what your internal IT or IT service provider is saying, you need to make sure that you, as an executive or business owner, you're exercising the right governance and oversight and making sure that the right bases are being covered. And the last points are really about trying to keep shattering these mindsets. So many business owners, so many business executives, especially in the SMB space, have what I refer to as the 1995 mindset, where they think from a security perspective, they're too small, they have nothing worth stealing, right? Running antivirus in their mind is good, right? And like I said, if this was 1995, yeah, great, bravo. But it's 2022, and that mindset is extremely, extremely dangerous. Like I said, that's why we're seeing ransomware being so prevailing in the small and mid-sized business scene here in Canada. We talked about this. The last thing that I wanted to just hit on too is just a point of reflection for organizations. We really are encouraging organizations, especially small and mid-sized organizations, to start having conversations around business uptime, whether that be from a disaster recovery perspective or through, because like I said, from a ransomware perspective. If the most critical data that you as an organization need to operate on a daily basis, if that was to be taken away from you, how long could your business sort of either operate or withstand that before you would cry uncle or say something far worse? Right? Is that a few minutes, a few hours? Is it a day, 3 days, 5 days, a week? It's so important to have this dialogue and discussion at the executive level, and also make sure that you're having that dialogue with either your internal IT team or IT service provider. Why? Because at the end of the day, this is defining what we refer to as sort of that data risk or cyber risk risk appetite, and then your corresponding risk tolerance. Because let's say you as an organization are willing to tolerate a week's worth of downtime. How you approach and you invest in cybersecurity is going to be very, very different than if you're an organization that can only tolerate that downtime for a few hours. Right? So it's really important to understand where that line in the sand is and to invest accordingly. I'll stop there, Jamie. I've babbled on long enough. So back to you. I'm looking forward to the broader panel discussion.
Awesome, thank you. I think one thing you brought up in a few different examples, like the Miley Cyrus analogy and a few others, is that importance of looking at the risk benefit or the cost benefit analysis for all the cyber decisions. And that's a great way for us to frame this discussion around the quiz, because the idea of the quiz is that there's no right answer necessarily, because it does depend on what you're willing to invest and the costs you're willing to spend. And that should be decided on based on the risks situation, right? So to your point, if a company can be down for an entire week and not lose customers or brand or reputation, how much they invest in and how far they go with some of these options is going to be quite different than the company that has reputational risk with a 3-hour outage. So and the reality is that all of our industries are different, and I'm not off the top of my head, I can't think of an industry that can be down a week, but there's certainly companies that have so few employees that losing a day's worth of data, once you do the math, it's pretty easy that losing a day's worth of data is, that's okay. You could handle that, and paying the insurance premium or the ransom or what have you isn't worth it. And so there's all that math, which is comforting for a lot of the CPAs in the room, because we do have a lot of CPA members. And at the end of the day, there is a bit of a math equation in terms of that risk cost benefit analysis. So thank you for emphasizing that in our kickoff, because I think it's going to come to be a big point that we talk about throughout the quiz. So we have set up polls. If you want to participate in the poll, I'm going to launch that, and that's going to help the panelists drive their conversation. So I'm going to launch that while we're going here. So it's live, and you guys can certainly participate in the poll, but we're going to get kick-started without worrying about how quickly you guys do the poll. So what's the best? We're starting with home. So this obviously applies to everyone, because we're all people, and most of us participate in cyber at home to some degree, whether we're frequent online buyers or just basic internet users. And then, of course, many of us are parents, so we're thrown into the cyber world in ways that we didn't expect or necessarily consent to, because the kids are doing it, right? So what's the best way to participate in e-commerce? So if I'm going to buy those shoes online, Should I buy them from the Facebook site? Should I make sure that I'm always using a PayPal or a Shopify or an Apple Pay app? Should I find what I want, then shut it down on Facebook and Google it or search it in Amazon, because Amazon never screws up my payments or my deliveries? And should I have a separate credit card, not because I'm going to hide the expenses from my husband, which is a whole different discussion, but so that I'm safe online? So should I have a credit card that I use for my online purchases in case something bad happens, or is that overkill? So which of these four makes sense? I'm going to turn to Adrian first, because I know you've got kids and a wife. So whether you participate on online shopping, certainly someone in your house does. Which one would you recommend of the four, or all four? What's your thoughts on this quiz question?
I mean, my first one will be like, for online, try to have a separate credit card. Like it's so easy to get compromised, and you don't want, to put like recurring billing or whatever, and then it's a hassle to go back and change them. So for online, just have one credit card, that's your online credit card, and use it like that. The other option is somebody like Shopify or PayPal. They are kind of like intermediaries, so they have some fraud protection around them. It's more secure than you go to an obscure website from, let's say, Facebook. You can click on a link, they can send you to a certain website that it's really obscure, and boom, they have your credit card information and they can use it again. Now with Amazon, yes, they protect your credit card, but they may not have all the products in there. So again, depending on what you're looking to get, Amazon may not be the first choice.
Love it. Good thoughts, Adrian. Sean, is there anything you would add or disagree with on that?
Yeah, for sure. I think at the end of the day, we have to realize like most credit cards have fraud protection. So, but only to the extent that you catch something that's fraudulent on your statement. So that's where having a separate credit card that you maybe check more frequently to make sure there's not fraudulent transactions on it makes sense. But either way, obviously you need to beware. Facebook, it depends who you're buying from. It's usually just people and random, they might not be a business, they might just be a single person. So there's probably a lot higher chance to get scammed. But really, if you are paying with a credit card, at the end of the day, if you notice that there's a fraudulent charge, you just call your credit card up and they'll take care of it, typically pretty quickly and easily. And yeah, that's my thoughts.
And I feel like Sean knows his audience, and he knows there's a lot of CPAs in the room, and reminding them that they should do their own personal reconciliations is really
got a bank rec. Yeah.
That's a good example of knowing your audience for sure. I will talk quickly about a cyber nuisance that's not a cyber security, but I just feel like I have to tell you this. If you are using the apps, whether it be Apple or Shopify or PayPal, no, I don't know about PayPal, but Shopify and Apple for sure, do note this isn't a security risk, but it's a pain in the butt risk. If you use multiple addresses, that those apps will they'll override the address that you type in when you purchase something. And so I've had donuts that were supposed to go to a grieving wife come to my house, and I'm like, what the heck? I didn't want these donuts at my house. And then last Sunday, actually, I had my healthy lunches get delivered to my office, which was not open on a Sunday when it was supposed to go to my house. So I've made that error too many times. That's not a security risk, but it's a good opportunity to let you know that your apps will override your delivery address. So please pay attention to that if you're relying on the apps. They have their pluses and they have their minuses. Next question. Which of the following statements is true about passwords? It must be changed only if it's compromised. Something, you should have a password that you can easily remember, but it's hard for others to guess. It should be system generated. So when your phone tells you, here's your system generated, you should be using that. Or it should be changed regularly. David, we'll start with you. What's your thoughts on this question? You're on mute.
Yeah, passwords are always an interesting thing that we get a lot of questions about. The concept of a securely generated password is not nearly as convenient for a lot of people, but it's also not necessarily more secure. We always recommend length is better than complexity. So if you can have a long password that it's easy to remember, think of a passphrase. The sky is blue today is a very secure password when you start mixing in uppercase letters or lowercase letters. throw in a number that's easy to remember at the end, even if it is, you know, something that is convenient to you, but isn't easy to guess for others. The easier it is for you to remember a password and type it correctly will also encourage you to change it more regularly. So making sure that you got at minimum, you know, no password older than 6 months. You don't want to change too often. Some people might say, oh, well, change your password monthly. Again, it's just adding complexity into your life, just like those overly, you know, generated passwords that look super secure. If you have to remember all those digits and you're constantly changing them, you're going to fall into habits of, well, I'm just going to change the last digit or something of that nature. Whereas if you're constantly using passphrases that the sky is blue today, or that winter storm was terrible, again, mixing in random characters, you'll get a lot more use out of your passwords, and it won't pain you to type every time. If you make your life easier, you'll be more inclined to change it more often and to follow security guidelines more regularly.
That's a great idea. I've never thought of using a phrase which could be easy to remember. Dom, what's your thoughts on what David said? Anything you disagree with or want to emphasize?
Well, I'd say it's you know, all those statements to some degree could be true, or it could also be false. It does depend on one's risk tolerance and context. You know, so as an example, if you're someone who is comfortable using a password manager as an example, like something like LastPass, you would be able to use system-generated passwords, which would be both long and complex, and would be more, you know, again, more secure than a passphrase. But again, there is some, you know, learning curve with using that type of tool or platform. So again, contextually, if you don't like using that, then yeah, it is more secure to use and more convenient to use passphrases. And David's absolutely right. I mean, length is more of a factor in terms of determining a password's overall strength versus complexity. The other thing which I would note as well is that password, you know, rotating passwords, if you're able to have a credential monitoring service where you're able to determine if a password has been breached, coupling that and then saying, okay, every time we be identified or notified the password or set of credentials have been compromised, change the password then. That is definitely more secure, and I'd say more of a modern approach than sort of taking the audit-driven approach of changing your password every 90 days. Doing that does absolutely nothing. To David's point, if anything, it just adds more frustration to the overall process. So don't just be picking arbitrary numbers. You know, the changing them every 90 days was honestly some arbitrary thing that came out of audit cycles from years ago. There's no merit or rhyme or reason to doing that today.
And what about like where you're changing passwords and then you end up retrieving passwords? If you have a habit of retrieving passwords, are you inherently creating unneeded risk, or is that not a big deal?
What do you mean by retrieving passwords?
Like pushing the forget password. Like, let's say hypothetically, if I have an account, which I've given up on knowing the password because the rules are too strict, and I just by default push the forget password every single time I go in that account. Does that mean that I'm putting unnecessary risk, or is that actually not that big of a deal?
Again, it's contextual. Some websites and some online platforms have a more robust, resilient way of recovering passwords than others. True. Others would be very easy to potentially intercept or to spoof. Others are much more resilient. So again, you'll hear the C word from me a lot, but you know, context is king when it comes to security. It comes in so many different shades.
And awesome. To Dom's earlier point, I think a password manager like LastPass is in your future.
Yeah, and a password manager is an interesting one. We're debating that at Amplify. I think we've made the decision as of 2022 that all new people will definitely have to have a password manager. And the question is always, how far do you push people that have had their habits for 4 years? Sean, when we think about passwords, the quiz participants absolutely say that the number one thing to do is two-factor authentication. If you were to recommend one thing, whether it's two-factor authentication, password manager, saving your passwords on Internet Explorer or Chrome, saving them on your phone, or using the same password for everything, which one would you absolutely recommend, and which one are you going to put the biggest warning out there for, Sean?
Sticky notes? No, I'm just kidding. Don't do sticky notes. I think as business leaders, we have to get more serious with our team and say, like, hey, you need to use a password manager and you need to have two-factor on it, because it's really about risk mitigation. We're hiring them to do a job, and we're also providing them the tools, and we're trying to manage risk as business owners. And I think, that shouldn't be the employee's decision, right? It should just be a corporate decision. The other thing too about having a password manager, obviously you want two-factor on that, and it doesn't matter what your password is or how often you change it, as long as you have two-factor, in my opinion. And I think the thing about a password manager is it enables you to have a different password for every single thing you use, which mitigates your risk substantially. If they manage to guess your password on one place, that's the only place they can get into. And typically, we all know that's never the case. Everybody has the same password for everything, and that is a huge risk. And especially because a lot of places still don't have two-factor enabled. Different online websites and shopping, so be it, but your bank might, so you have a bit more protection there. But just the fact that you have the same password everywhere is a significant risk as well. Yeah, that's my thoughts. And I think we need to kind of start looking at these things as like, you need to have it, not a, if you like it, you can have it. And we, stop appeasing the people that want convenience, because it's pretty convenient to use two-factor nowadays.
Yeah, we definitely have two-factor as a requirement without question. And to be honest, it was a little painful to put in, but not really. It was pretty easy, to be honest. Adrian,
and password managers are super convenient too. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear, because we're definitely pushing more and more of us to have those. Adrian, if you were to say one last thing about passwords from a personal perspective, but also a larger, what would be your final words on passwords?
I mean, two things. I just put a link in there which everybody can use, and they can type in their email or their phone number, and they can see if there is anything in the dark web, if they ever got hacked from that perspective. So to see what passwords are available in there. But for me personally, I like to use the password manager, and on every important account, never have similar passwords at all, because that's a problem. Like, if you change a letter or a character or something like that, then it's easier, for any hacker to kind of get into more accounts for you.
Awesome. That's great. So before we leave the home perspective and us as individuals, want to talk about mobile. So strangely enough, recently I've gotten tons of text messages where they're asking me to click on links, and some of them are really heartwarming. Like, someone was dying and they really needed my help, and they knew enough about me that it was almost tricky. But I didn't fall for any of them, but it was a bit unexpected. And so what I realized was that my cell phone number was on I think it was my Facebook or LinkedIn or something like that. So David helped me go through the checklist of how in the world are these strangers getting my text number anyways. Got rid of all that, and it's since been solved, and I'm not getting weird texts, which I'm very happy about. But curious to know, David, maybe I'll start with you, since we've had a conversation about this before. When it comes to mobile, what's safe and what's not? So is it okay to open and read a text message from an unknown number? I mean, the people that are dating, if you say no, I mean, their whole life is going to be ruined, but maybe that's the reality, right? Is it okay to reply but not have clicked on a link? Is it okay to open an attachment or a picture? Or should you just not be texting anyone you don't know and using messaging systems that are encrypted, etc.? So what's your suggestion when it comes to texting?
Yeah, at its very core, there's no real harm in receiving a text from somebody. You can read it, you can see it in the preview, you can click on it. It's similar to email to some extent. The rule is, don't click on anything that you're not expecting, i.e., if there's a link in it, if there's a verify your password here. And we've all been told for years, don't click on attachments. But links are more dangerous these days. And as you pointed out, how easy it is to phish somebody's information from an online source and act like you know them, texting from an unknown number can be very disheartening sometimes when you get that text and you're like, how do they know so much? But you've put that information out there. But again, really being conscious of those links, definitely don't click on, if you didn't expect somebody to send you a link, don't click on the link. If you didn't expect an invoice from a company, because I've started seeing those from in text. Oh, here's your tracking information for the package you didn't order. Those are really common ones I'm seeing people click on. It's always best just to avoid those. If you truly did, submit for a package from Canada Post, go to Canada Post's website and track your package. Don't follow the random link that may or may not be legit. And it's more effort to try and figure out if it's a legit than it is to simply, oh, I did order something from Canada Post, and go directly to the source where you already have your login, and not follow the breadcrumb trail to something terrible on the other hand.
And that's a good point, actually, is those shippers, be it Canada Post or FedEx or UPS or other well-known ones, those text messages, which you might have already authorized that they can text you, you've actually got authorization, but those can look really legit. And ironically, if you are a frequent online buyer, you could actually have a Canada Post shipment on its way, and yet coincidentally they pick the right time to send you a text and hack you, right? So I've seen those that look, I never click on those, but they do, like I've shown my husband and I'm like, this is so convincingly real looking, like it's not surprising that people get in trouble because it looks real. Dom,
Yeah,
any last words?
Direct to the source.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Dom, any last words from a home perspective that you'd like to point out?
I think the thing I just want to point out at the end of the day, the important thing is mindset. It's mobile smartphones today, it could be some other technology tomorrow. At the end of the day, at the root of all of this is just having a more a more aware mindset, and whether you be on your computer, whether you be on your smartphone, whether it be on your tablet, whether it be something which you're able to see it in your head in the future kind of thing, always have that healthy dose of skepticism and go through authorized channels like David was saying there.
Perfect. So now we're going to move to the employees. So I opened the poll and we've got some of those coming in, and looking at your seat if you're working for other people or for those of us that own businesses, when you're got the hat on of getting the work done, what do you need to think about from the seat of the employee? So when receiving an email from an unknown contact that has an attachment, what should you do? Should you open the attachment to view its contents? Should you delete the email? Should you forward it to coworkers to allow them to open it first? Should you forward it to your personal account so you can open it at home? What should you do when you have an unknown contact sending you attachments? Adrian, what do you tell your clients to do in that case?
Most of the cases, I would say first look at the email. So when you get those kind of emails, there is a lot of information in there which you can figure out. Is it coming from a legit source or not a legit source? See if there is any extra links in there, like to point you out. At the end of the day, if you get an email that has an attachment and you don't know, you're not expecting that, I would say delete it. It's more safe than sorry.
Awesome, good advice. David, I know that you had us put in a safe attachment software, and that's there's only been a few moments that I've had to be patient and wait. And most of the time, that's actually when I'm on a call with Jesse. He sends me an attachment, but then I can't open his attachment until it does the safe check. 99% of the time, it opens as quickly as I'm able to get to it anyways. So I know that's one of your recommendations. Anything else you would point out in terms of attachments from people you don't know?
I'm definitely going to echo with Adrian. If you don't expect it, delete it. Number one thing we see is attached is your invoice, or reset your credentials. Open this PDF file. Always remembering that this day and age, as technology has gotten advanced, it's great for business. However, there's also more auto run things out of Word documents or PDF files. It's not just avoid zip or exe files anymore. So definitely if you don't expect it, never open it. In a business sense, absolutely. The file filter that we've put on for you guys through Microsoft's 365 side of things is great. It's scanning every attachment and it's looking for links and attachments and executables and attachments, and filtering those out if it truly is malicious. So the more checks and balances you can put in place, the safer you'll be. But user training and as a business owner, just being smart about how you approach those things, it is really important.
Awesome. So in terms of what you'd recommend, Dom, would you recommend that software that checks for viruses? Would you recommend antivirus software? Would you recommend only opening virus checked attachments from known sources? Would you expect people to use USB flash drives more often? Or do you think they should actually go to a Dropbox or an equivalent of a Dropbox?
And back to the aforementioned context, right? There's an example. Again, doing security well, and from a risk management perspective, you need to focus on resilience, right? Because again, not every protection mechanism is going to work 100% of the time. So if one does fail, you need to make sure that there's something else backing up. So again, having different levels of protections, whether that be at the, David was talking about Office 365, so having protections there, having protections at the endpoint level for the laptop or desktop or what have you. So if something does get past Office 365 and tries to run after someone's clicked on it, maybe it's captured there. Having that various levels of defense in depth, a term that's been used ad nauseum for 25 plus years in the security field. There is still a lot of truth in taking that type of approach, because it tends to lend itself to more of a resilient or robust architecture or structure when it comes to cyber risk management. So I'm definitely in favor of that type of approach. You mentioned USBs versus cloud storage. Again, it's context of business process, context of what is the risk appetite, and where that sort of USB example tends to pop up, and I see it a lot with our law firm clients and accounting firm clients, where they say, we still get a lot of files from our clients or customers via USB. They will drop a USB stick off. Right, so it's still, for many of these organizations, it's an acceptable way of doing things. The trouble is that they've never had the conversations around, well, what are the risks of doing so, versus what's the cost of moving or migrating business processes away from that. As a security professional, I definitely would advocate still having USBs. But if for some reason there's still a vitally important client, there's one our accounting clients here in Greater Vancouver, one of their most important customers, they get a lot of money from this individual, insists on only using USB. So we say, okay, well, let's rather than having anyone be able to plug in the USB, let's create something which is completely segregated and separate from the corporate network. You get your files there, see what's there, right? And then be able to, at least through some control mechanisms, migrate those files from that very secure location to where someone would be able to work with them. So again, it is contextual. You can take a case-to-case basis, but at least around USBs, I definitely wouldn't allow that everyone to use that. Same token, I wouldn't allow everyone to have access to cloud storage access as well, like Dropbox, especially, I guess, if you're dealing with sensitive client information. Accidentally uploading something to Dropbox, as an example, could have significant privacy implications, or legal implications as well. Very quick side story is that we had a client project, this was probably about 4 years ago, where one of their workers wanted to work on a file remotely, and the owner of this business had fought remote access for years. So there was no easy way for this employee who had good intention to work remotely. So they took basically the customer client files, which had social insurance numbers and financial data, and put that in their personal Dropbox and work on that at home. We ended up seeing it as a data transfer. Their IT provider saw that, and we worked with them to identify what was going on, saw what happened, and then at the time, privacy laws are at least changing here, but at the time, that was a big privacy no-no. So they had to actually reach out to the privacy commissioner and say, this happened, these are the steps we're taking to address it. Again, all that could have been addressed by, again, looking at the context of how do workers work and how can security best support those business processes.
Yeah, those are really good stories that I think would resonate with a lot of our people. Sean, curious, you obviously run a team. of a lot of employees that are, you know, they'll know more about cybersecurity than the average person, but they're busy, right? And they're client focused. So how do you coach those employees to make sure that they're not so busy with their clients, with their, you know, real job, that they're still taking into account email safety? And so our poll says that majority of the people think that the number one thing you could be reminding that those employees to do is to check the actual email address and make sure that you have a system in place that notifies when you have an external email. And we all know that the emails that, you know, they literally have Jamie L. Smith, so it looks super real. They have my exact title, which is not a common title, but yet when you look at the email, it's xyz245@gmail.com. It's not at all me, right? But it's presented. If you don't take the time to look at the email, you think the email came from me, and then you click the link, open the attachment, or send your cell, or pay a bill, or buy Walmart gift certificates. We've seen it all. Yeah. So how do you make sure, is that what you would say is the number one thing for your employers, or which of the quiz items would you like to point out, Sean?
Yeah, there's a few different things. So, and if you are if you're being targeted, they're going to go and register a domain that's pretty close to yours, and instead of an L, they'll use an I, and it'll look exactly the same, and you won't even know. Your employees will look at the email and say, "Oh yeah, that's her email. Great." So they can get those weird characters and change them. So there's some things you can do around that to protect on the IT side. The one answer on the poll that I would have loved to see is ask your IT person. Because if you don't know, and if you're not sure, go to the expert, right? Just forward it to your support team and say, hey, is this safe? Or call them and say, hey, can you just check this email for me? I'm not sure. It kind of seems a little weird that they're attaching this invoice. I don't really know who this person is. Or, they're updating their banking info, and we don't have accounting controls in place, so maybe we should think about that as well. But yeah, last resort, if you're unsure and you're not completely confident, is ask your IT person or people.
Awesome. Adrian, if we came to you and asked you, what are some of the things that you would suggest to help out to keep that efficiency going? Like, for example, I've heard really great things. Actually, my husband mentioned how useful it is for his company. And then a guy I was golfing with back when it was golf season was talking about how useful it was for his company, where they actually had like the fish button. So an email came in, you identified it wasn't good, and then you pushed the fish so that it was like that everything was blocked. It was clear that had come in, etc. I'm not exactly sure what that software does. So would you recommend that software? Like, what do you think is the best way to just make it easy for the people? Because what I know to be true is that the easier you make it, the more people will participate in the cybersecurity, right? And so, right. So for example, if you have to like 3 clicks to mark it junk, you're 2 clicks too much sometimes.
So I think we have to step back a little bit and look at the security awareness training. And what I mean by that is we are pushing more and more towards our customers. When you onboard somebody, they have to go through a training, and that training really helps them identify exactly like what Sean was saying, identify, bad emails. They will also help them at home, on their personal life, how they identify, a threat at home. But yeah, the security awareness training, it's number one we push. And there were some comments on the chat. It's also coming from the cyber insurance companies. So now you cannot really get a cyber insurance policy if you don't have your employees part of awareness training. So that's number one. The second is there are softwares, as you mentioned, you have like an Outlook add-on button in there, and you believe, okay, it's a legit email or it's a bad email. You click on that button, that Outlook automatically gathers the email and sends it for analyze to a live person. So that's an option. The other option is you mentioned, like, call your IT provider. Let them check it. Let them, download the emails, and like somebody like us will be able to tell you if it's a legit or not email. We have parallel systems in the office where we can test that email. We can click on it to make sure it's right or wrong. So yeah, there is options out there.
Awesome. And the last part of this employee perspective, David, which controls do you think are worthwhile for helping cybersecurity? The group says that having a reporting process in place, which we kind of alluded to, is the best control that a company can invest in. Other options would be, sharing confidential information only over the phone or in person. That seems a bit impractical especially in a COVID world, but maybe it's necessary. Physical spaces, we're all forgetting about physical spaces, but someday they'll come back. And we know that the number of cyber incidences that have to do with letting the wrong people into your office building, et cetera, used to be quite high. It probably isn't anymore because we don't get to go anywhere. But what about, should we be using Teams and Slacks? Is that like a control and an opportunity that we're forgetting, even though we all have access to it? And of course, like purchase orders and requisition process for payments, like should you even allow payments through random emails and ad hoc instructions? So David, what are some of the controls that you would point out?
The easiest one that, and Sean briefly alluded to it, is the checks and balances. If you're changing banking information, who's approving that? And are you for sure you're talking to the right person? So whether that's a quick Teams call, hey, Jamie, did you send me this new banking update for me to pay this invoice? I'm looking at your face over video and you say, yeah, absolutely, be a big help if you can take care of that for me. Perfect, move on. I don't need to trust the email. I don't need to do any of that. If for certain actions, like I said, changing banking information, any invoice over X amount of dollars, request for gift cards, as we unfortunately see time and time again, most business accounting practices won't pay for something with gift cards, and yet we see them go out the door. So just having those extra checks and balances. If it's an IT related thing, bouncing it off of Sean. Hey, Sean, is this the correct way to change my password versus clicking this random link to change it because it's expiring? Is it really expiring? But reaching out to your IT professional, internal or external, just for that double check. That's the best system. It's sometimes the manual way is the best way. All these, third-party apps that can be added in, especially if it's a cute little fish button that's like, yeah, I want to report this, but knowing and communicating with somebody directly will get you the best result always.
Yeah, and going back to Dom's earlier point of blind trust, it's bad enough if you have blind trust over your IT professional or your IT service company or the so-called CFO that you think is taking care of risk and doesn't even know that it's on her scope. Blind trust of just because you put software in place is probably even worse than all of those human blind trusts, right? Now, if we move to team lead, which is basically where we're a supervisor of other people, which pretty much all the AHA members have people reporting to them. What's a couple things we could point out to those people that are doing it from a team lead perspective? And Dom, curious, when you manage a team, how often should cybersecurity be on the formal agenda, the informal agenda? Like, how often do we need to talk about cybersecurity in order to really get our people to understand our methodology and our perspective as a company, whether it's an extreme version of security or whether it's a lighter version? How often do we need to reinforce our perspective, our policies, and our methodology on cyber? What would you recommend to those supervisors of teams that are trying to make sure that they can check that box at the end of the day?
That's a good question, Jamie. And again, the answer to that is heavily contingent on sort of what the overall security culture of the organization is. As an example, if you have executives who and the board they don't talk about cybersecurity, honestly, it doesn't matter how often team leads are talking about cybersecurity. It's the most important decision makers and ultimate owners of decisions in the organization don't care about it or don't talk about it or just pass it off to IT. Like I said, it's really irrelevant how often you talk about it at the lack of the sort of the grassroots level of the organization. So the organization needs to make sure that there are executives who walk the walk and talk the talk when it comes to cyber risk management, that they're at least discussing it quarterly, if not more so at board meetings or executive meetings or what have you. And then that needs to filter its way down. So from a team lead perspective, I think it's important maybe once a quarter to again reinforce, here's how the organization securely handles client information, or here's our processes for how we securely transfer data to our customers or clients or what have you. Having those refreshers, having that baked into what Adrian was saying is an overall security awareness program, and not having it just annually. Doing annual training is meaningless. It's not effective. That is very much if you want to check the box mentality, God bless, go for it. If you're expecting for that to change behaviors or have more positive outcomes more frequently, that's going to do nothing. So baking that in and making sure that becomes, again, like part of the DNA of the fabric of the organization. Those are routinely discussed and brought up, again, open forums, safe settings. That's going to go a long way, like I said, in terms of making sure that positive security outcomes manifest themselves more often than not.
Can I add something in here? I think it all depends also on the organization IT knowledge, correct? Because you have some organizations, like for example, Amplify, that, tech savvy, you know how to use the computers, or you go into, I know, like a logistics company or like a manufacturing company, their level of knowledge at that level, it's way different than other organizations. So I think it has to be really assessed per organization type and then build a plan from there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And along with that knowledge is also the frequency of use, right? So a logistics company, they might check their email once a day, once every 3 days. So putting the same burden of training and understanding on them versus someone who lives and breathes through their email is like their to-do list is, that's a challenging proposition. But on the other hand, that less frequent user and that less IT savvy person could be the ultimate opportunity for the person trying to hack, right? So it's kind of
because the hackers, they always look by the weakest link. I always say that. So they will always try to attack whoever is the weakest link to the organization. They always look for that person. They will never look for the highest, most trained. They will never look for the IT provider. They will always look for the receptionist, for somebody that really will click on anything and everything.
So that's going to mean that everyone that's getting hacked, their feelings are hurt. They're not going to share their experiences anymore.
Maybe.
I'm just teasing, but I hear what you're saying, and also, and if they get some luck, if they see some evidence that they're making progress, then, they're going to get more creative with that person. So Sean, when it comes to cyber training, which, lots of people are checking the box by attending with us today, the team or the members, 91% are really echoing what Dom was just mentioning, that it really has to be ingrained in the culture and reoccurring communication. What do you find the most successful? Like the clients that you have that you consider ideal, what do they do to train their people or to communicate or to repeat messages?
Yeah, I think kind of mentioned at the beginning a little bit, we need to set the precedent and, say that it's not acceptable to not have MFA or two-factor. You have to say like these things are not optional anymore, and then just build up a healthy culture and also a healthy form of paranoia. With Adrian kind of mentioned security awareness training. Part of that can just be like you can actually send fake phishing campaigns, so your IT folks can send out phishing emails that are fake. They're not from a hacker, they're from the IT department. And those keep people on their toes. They make sure that they look out for them. And you can really customize them. And obviously that's where it gets, you can use vendors that you actually have, and you can really try to trick your people. And then you get that healthy sense of paranoia, and you really have set the culture and the precedent of security first. And I think once you have both of those, you really start to, you train all the weak links that maybe have less of an IT savvy background, they start to learn, right? And that's kind of what we're looking for to kind of protect those people from the hackers that are trying to find them. And, layer that on with all your other IT security layers, and you can get a fairly strong posture. And obviously the other thing to consider too is, when you're considering your digital transformation and your servers are not going down every other week, once that's solved and you're looking at how do you take your business processes, digitally transform them and put in controls and processes to have checks and kind of maybe 2 people or 3 people look at things, or have a standard way that things get done, and if it goes outside that way, it's a red flag for somebody that it could be a security problem. Or maybe not a legitimate request. if you have that in place as well, and you really build your digital, your digital platform and your processes around that, it makes it easier for your team as well.
Awesome. Before we move into strategy and what business leaders that are on the executive, own companies, etc., should be doing from a high level and big picture perspective, does any of you have any final comments or points that you want to bring up in regards to that employee seat or the team lead seat? All right. So strategy question. So the best way to ensure our team is actually following policy and best practice. The majority are echoing what you just said, Sean, in terms of the fake hacks and having those phishing campaigns. And I suspect you could even make those like competitive and fun. Adrian, what would you say would be the best way to ensure your team's following policy and best practice? There's the fake hacks idea. There's case studies and training. You brought up onboarding, which we don't have listed. I love the idea of having like more detailed training in the onboarding. We're definitely going to take a look at that at Amplify. Relying on training and not shame. So, there's that. If you make it competitive, does that inherently shame the people that that lose the battle? So, that's something to think about. I know I mentioned to David that I don't want a list of people that fail our test if we do a test, because then I might get upset with them, and I don't want to be upset with them. What are the ways that your best clients, how do they reinforce their policy and best practice, Adrian?
It's training and testing, back and forth and back and forth. So, and then with that testing, you can actually see, who's at the bottom. You can give more training to those people to kind of bring them up the speed to the other people. And then always, because again, things also really change really fast in security, correct? Like, things that were 6 months ago, they may not be today what's happening. There is new stuff. So that's why it's so important to kind of have that security awareness training where you put and we talk with our customers like, okay, what's a reasonable time for somebody to spend time on training? Is it half an hour a month? Is it an hour every 2 months? Like, it has to come from the management and come back to the kind of the IT provider or the security provider and actually enforce that. Like, make an executive decision. Okay, how much people are need to spend, and it all depends also on the organization level, on their level of knowledge when it comes down to IT.
Awesome. So Dom, I know that on your website there's lots of discussions of how you back up your data, and each company is going to have a different perspective of how frequently it has to be and how much cost, and do they rely on their IT service department? Do they have their own extra servers? How do you go about talking through with an executive what they should do in terms of backing up their data? And then similarly, the insurance conversation, right? Because how much insurance should we have when it comes to cyber? Because ultimately we'd have to pay that deductible, and is the deductible worth it? And then we flag to the insurance company that we have risks, which seems to always go downhill from there. It seems like insurance will always get their money back somehow. So these are conversations I know that you guys are having with every client. It's a huge part of the strategic conversation. What are the things you want to point out in regards to backing up data and insurance?
Well, the thing I really want to point out with that again is that it shouldn't be something which just gets handed off to IT or the IT service provider. I can't tell you how many business owners, executives I talk to, and we're talking to them about cybersecurity, cyber risk management, or what the most critical systems are, and they say, "Oh, ask IT." Or ask our IT guy. I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you as the chief executive, if you don't know what your most critical business processes are, if you don't know what systems and data support those critical processes, you're failing terribly in your role from an oversight and guidance perspective in making sure that the right things are being protected and are being backed up. Right? It's unfair for IT, especially one that's an outsourced service provider, to identify what the critical systems are. They don't own those systems. They don't own that data. And that's why, like I said, often what a lot of these business owners and executives don't understand is that, let's say a data breach happens, or let's say, you get hit by ransomware and you can't recover, the most critical data because the IT team thought it was something else. you as an executive, the first thing you say when that happens is, "Oh, it's the IT guy's fault. Damn him." Again, that's really crappy leadership, because ultimately that responsibility falls on your shoulders. And that's where we're seeing a lot of animosity when these things happen, because again, there was that blind trust, the thing I mentioned at the beginning, where again, the CEO or executives were blindly trusting that the right things were being done. Any executive who isn't performing due diligence or is passing that due diligence off, again, they're skirting their responsibilities, and they can be held legally liable. And that's again a thing that a lot of business owners don't understand as well. And again, that tends to happen far more in the U.S., where lawyers are plentiful, but it still does happen here to a certain degree. So I think it's really important when we're talking about going through that process, the things that often when we are going through that with executives, is just starting with those very basic questions. What is the type of data that makes your organization tick? What type of data, what is that data that makes your organization move and fulfill its mission on a daily basis? After that, it's like, okay, well then we now know that. We now need to then work with executives. We can work with IT, work with IT service provider to identify other aspects of that data. Who has access to that data? Where does that data live? And then by going through that process, and then we can further peel back the onions and say, what is the availability status of that data, right? If that data, if the closest you can get is a day old worth of that data, is that okay? Or do you need it to be 6 hours? Do you need it to be measured in minutes? Again, those are going to inform what your level of spend will be and your approach to an overall data backup architecture. Again, the whole point of this is that it's driven through dialogue, and it's not just washing your hands and giving it up to IT.
I love that. And, to follow up on that, David, how do you know that you're having the right dialogue with your clients? So, and it's a two-way street kind of, because, how do you make sure that your clients understand the value that you're providing inherently with the service? So for example, you've got the 1 day backup, and that's incredible information for all these decision making moments that an executive is going to have. And then, where you have optional opportunities, but you're not necessarily doing it by default. Like, how do you make sure that you're asking the right questions and having the dialogue so people know where they can trust you and rely on you, and where, they either have to ask you or you just don't play in that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's crux of IT, and specifically, as an outsourced service provider, is if we're doing our job right, the business owner doesn't know we're doing anything, because everything is working, everything's backed up, everything's secure, and it just works. You don't want to hear from the IT person every week, every day. So how do I show value in that? Is a tough question. But on the other side, specific to data security, backups, having that dialogue and open conversations with, the business owner, who ultimately it's their data, it's their future, should something happen, and trying to make them understand that the data is half or most of your business. The people are incredibly important, but if they lose access to the tools that allow them to do the great job they're already doing, it's a big deal. So furthering to some of the points Dom made is, testing. How do I show value? I need to show that, yes, we're backing up nightly or every 6 hours. That doesn't mean anything if I can't bring it back in a reasonable time frame. What is your how long could you be down for? So say something like a server hard drive fails, we need to bring all the data back. Just as a simple example, how long is it appropriate for that to take? And how much is that going to cost one way or the other? Sort of thing. If you say it's no problem if it takes all week, we can have this really slow cloud storage, and it's going to take 3 days to download all the data back. No problem. We're happy that it's backed up offsite. We'll always get it back. Great. But if you go, no, we're losing millions every hour that we can't operate because of this, well, you're going to need a different system. But having that dialogue and showing that it can happen, how long can I get your systems 100% back up and running in 24 hours? If that is a key thing, ask your IT provider or your internal team to prove it, to show it, and run a DR scenario. It's especially when we start talking ransomware, things like that. Nobody wants to pay these ransoms, but some people get stuck having to. If you know going into it that you know what your downtime is going to be, your response time is going to be, the little thing of who do you actually call to run a DR scenario, or when something bad comes, making sure that key decision makers within a business know who to call. Specifically, maybe it's a specific department within a company like Fully Managed. How do you get your maximum response time? And like I said, doing a test, actually seeing the results. If your IT provider says, I can have all your data back within the hour, and you've just blindly trusted that, definitely ask them to run a test. There might be a project cost to it or something, but your peace of mind will come from actually seeing the result. Oh, yes, everything was 100% fully restored, all my data back within 24 hours. Excellent. I know as a business cost, that's money well spent.
Awesome. Adrian, when you think about what David just said, is there anything that GamTech would do differently or that you'd want to add on? You're on mute, Adrian.
Similar to what David said, like I'm going to my customers, I say save a file on whatever, on the file drive, on the share, delete it 2 days later and give us a call and see if we can recover the file. Have that peace of mind that you can always recover, because again, on the back end, we run systems, we run alerts, we run a lot of other things, to make sure that all the customers are always up and running. But I want the customers always to make sure they test and they have that peace of mind.
Awesome. Sean, when it comes to business continuity plan, and you're trying to convince that cheap client, and they can be of all sizes, we all know, to invest in taking the time to come up with a business continuity plan where they, to David's point, they know who to call. And when they make that call, they know what to expect and what the time frame it is to get back on their feet. How do you approach those conversations, and what are the things that you're going to point out to them to make sure that they understand the value from a strategic perspective of that business continuity plan?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a big important thing is just the mindset. I think you need to assume that you'll either have an outage or you'll be hacked, either now or in the future. It's just kind of a fact of life, and it doesn't really matter if you have 2FA. If somebody's targeting you, they'll get it. They're very sophisticated, and computer systems are like infinitely complex, so there's always a way. And then the other thing too, I think everybody sort of mentioned it, each business is unique, so don't depend on your IT provider to understand your business. You should understand what the critical components, whether it's a system or it's files, that your customers need, and you need to keep delivering to keep your revenue coming in the door. And once you understand that, you can have the conversations around what do we need to get back online, how long can this system be down for. If you have a location and you have a medical operating table, well, maybe your needs are higher and your risk is higher, and therefore the cost and what you need to put in place is higher. But you really need to understand that, and you can't depend on your IT provider to do that. They'll understand it with you, but I don't think you can just assume that they do understand it just because they are your IT provider. And then you put together your plan to mitigate your risk and your loss. Just like in other parts of your business, you look at insurance, you look at all those things, safety programs, obviously, with a lot of businesses, you're mitigating risk, and you're making sure that if something does go wrong, you know the extent of it. And then just align those risks with we call it an RTO, a recovery time objective. So what are your recovery times for certain systems? Your critical systems you might want to have back online sooner, and then others are kind of nice to have, so you can get them done later. And just really having that plan. And when an outage happens, because most likely it will, exactly, you have that plan. Okay, in this scenario, this is how we execute it, and it's kind of detailed. Step 1 is this, step 2 is this, 3 is this. When we had when in Calgary, when there was floods and downtown buildings were all getting flooded and servers were offline, a lot of companies didn't even have the contact list for their employees and how to get a hold of them. And so if you actually go through scenario planning, you can get all that information that you're going to need, and you can have it in place rather than just try to figure it out as you go, which will inevitably extend your recovery.
Right. So if you try and like the scenario planning allows you to get out of the hypothetical and into more tangible, similar to what we're trying to do here is get a little more tactical than what you normally see in a cyber training session. So Dom, at the end of the day, when you go in and talk to clients about who's in charge of cyber, what's the ultimate answer in most companies? Who is in charge of cyber? The members say it's everyone. The problem with that answer, of course, is if it's everyone, then it's kind of no one. What's your perspective?
I can frame it back from a risk management perspective. Ultimately, who owns, the legal risk of the organization? Who owns the operational risk? Who owns the financial risk? Ultimately, those are risks that are owned by the executive and/or board, if one exists. Cyber risk is no different, right? If the answer is a business owner, when I ask a business owner or executive, who owns cyber risk, when they say IT, I always say, wrong answer, because it is, right? The organizations that are on that path that push that authority to IT is a key part of the equation. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to discredit IT. They're a key part of the fulfillment and operational aspect of that. But owning that as a risk, that cannot be owned by IT. Organizations that do that, and unfortunately, the majority of organizations do take that approach, they're doomed to experience very significant security outcomes. Organizations where that risk is owned and managed, sufficient governance and oversight at the executive or board level, they're in a far more resilient state. And to Sean's point, data breaches, security incidents, these are going to happen. That is just part of occurrences as part of operating as a business, just like audits are something that we have to live with. And again, if you can be prepared for that audit, and the audit can just be a speed bump. If you're not prepared for that, then that can be a very eviscerating experience. To me, it's the same thing with like a data breach or a security incident. You can be prepared, you can have the right responsibility and the right authority structures in place, and it can just be a speed bump. But for organizations that are unprepared and don't have the right structures in place, that can be a massive sinkhole. And make no mistake about it, cyber risk for the majority of small and mid-sized organizations in this country is an existential risk. Right? We can talk about all the big data breaches, Desjardins, and all the the ones that may dominate the news, either in Canada or US perspective. But every single one of those enterprise level organizations, they have a massive financial war chest to survive. They all thrive afterwards. Right? What the media doesn't talk about is the small and mid-sized organizations that maybe have been in family generations for decades. If they get hit by a massive security attack, they have a massive data breach. Many of them, especially during the age of COVID, when many organizations are hard up with cash, they can't survive all of a sudden a massive lawsuit against them. That shuts down their business for good, right? And you don't hear that in the news, but we see that every single day on the front line. So when it comes to the ownership, if you want your organization to continue surviving and thriving in this century, if you're an executive, you need to own that risk, plain and simple.
I love it. And the reason I wanted to end on that particular question before we get into wrap up is that I think for our CPA members, which are by and large either business leaders or CPAs, if there's anything I personally think you should take away from it is asking who owns cyber risk. Because if you can't answer who it is, somebody might assume it's you, right? And so, and that's true for those of us that operate at a CFO or finance leader level. There are organizations that think because there's obviously a financial consequence to many of the cyber incidents that it's on our radar and we're doing it. And for us as fractional CFOs, for example, there's some cases where it is in our scope and we have a big part of cybersecurity. But there's others where it's not necessarily been discussed or clear and it isn't on our priority list. So we're not necessarily doing it. And so what I've been telling our CFOs and our controllers is that if you don't know where you play in cybersecurity as the CFO or controller at our clients, then you are missing a conversation that has to happen because someone might be assuming it's you. And similarly, if you're an executive, whether you have the COO title or even a director title, or of course, if you're a business owner, to Dom's point, you need to know who exactly has cybersecurity as a KPI and as a role and responsibility. That doesn't mean they actually get it done, by and large, the work is probably going to get done by the IT, whether it's a GAM tech or a fully managed or an internal department or a competitor of you folks. The work itself is probably going to get done by IT, but who is owning it from a strategic perspective and a KPI perspective? And so I really think it's important for every member we have. There's very few exceptions in it. And also, you know, even if you're at the Suncors or Enbridges of the world, know your role and responsibilities when it comes to cyber, because if you don't have a clear answer to that, someone else might be assuming something else. And then it's going to fall into the cracks if an incident happens, because you don't know where your responsibility is, what your role is, and where you play in this important conversation. And there's not a single member of AHA that wouldn't have some role or responsibility or reliance, because we all have important jobs. So, and we're all dealing with cyber. Other things I want to point out before I ask the group to give their last final words, I'd say that for the most part, we've answered the questions. I did a quick check and it looks like we've addressed them over the course of this conversation. It's been so valuable. A few things I want to point out that I heard is, you know, there's obviously some top-down considerations. So Dom pointed out that, you know, if your board's not talking about cyber and your executive is, it's not the kind of thing that you can really have like from the grassroots. It does have to be a bit top down. So that's something to think about when you assess your culture and your policies in cyber. I loved Adrian's point on onboarding. I think that's a really great time to have, you know, an attentive audience, and hopefully not one that's swamped with client work or projects or process or whatever it is that your company does. So onboarding and setting the expectation and setting that tone up front. Love that idea. Obviously, I think that when Sean was talking about like how fast cyber moves like that, and we use that in some of the marketing for this session, is that the reality is when it comes to training, if you check the box annually and you get all of your training done and you've done all the testing and you're up to date, the reality is what's true today sitting here in January isn't necessarily enough in March, because they're creative. And as you mentioned, Sean, eventually they'll get you if they want to get you. So you've got to stay on top of it, and it changes fast. And if you're a target of a sophisticated group or person or whatever it is, like they'll figure out a way and they'll get creative and they'll constantly change. And that's not the most optimistic thought, but it just reminds us that we can't check the box. We can't have January be our cyber focus and then, you know, we're good for the year, right? So love that perspective. And then David just walking through, you know, who to call, what the steps are, what the expectations are. It's so vital to actually understand. Let's step back and to the point that Sean made about scenario planning. If this happened, and just pick a case. I mean, you can Google a case. It's not, you don't have to be too creative. If this happened, who would I call? What would I do? Right. And that's really important. And it's simple. And to the point we made before, some of the simplicity gets, you know, understated because we think this is so like out there and scary and hard and to Dom's point, expensive. And really, sometimes if you step back, it is simple. Do you know, how many employees do you have? What would it cost to be down for 3 hours? Okay, it costs us that. Yeah, we can accept that. How bad would it be to be down for 6 hours? How bad would it be? And you just have to do the math, and it's really can be a lot more simpler than it first appears when we're starting off, right? So those are the points that I want to emphasize, that I'm going to take back and figure out if I've got enough going on at Amplify. Want to hear your last and final brilliant thoughts that you want everyone to leave with. So we'll start with you, Sean. What's your final thought that you'd like to either repeat or emphasize or bring up?
Yeah, final thought. I think just the role that you as accountants and leaders play is just to take it under, like, this is your responsibility, and if your business doesn't have somebody kind of championing cybersecurity, then you should step up and be that one, and really like highlight the risk there, because you know, if your business has an outage, it's going to affect you as an employee, all your team members. And like Jamie said, a lot of things are fairly straightforward. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit for a lot of mid-sized companies that they can take care of. And so, you know, just how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? You know, take that away and back to your companies and make a difference.
Awesome. Adrian, what's your final thought?
On cyber, like, I mean, two things, and Sean kind of said that I think the phrase changed from the last couple of years when, people were saying, oh, we'll never get hacked. Like we are so secure. Everything is, up and running there. I think the question is right now is when. Like everybody will get hacked at a certain point and more bad or more less, but at one point everybody will get hacked. And I have a stat here and I can put it on the chat, but there is a stat done by Cybercrime magazine that 60% of small businesses, companies close within 6 months of being hacked. So it's really serious. It's coming. And if you look there, they even put some cost around that. It's the reality we live on. So I think really people really have to really treat this one as, something really important for their business.
David, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the best thing I can recommend for everybody, ask the question. Don't assume that somebody has it under control. Don't assume that because somebody says, especially with cybersecurity, it is extremely important. Don't assume that just because they say, yep, you're covered. Ask how. Multi-factors come up a few times. If you don't know what that is yet, ask. If you don't know what a secure password should look like, ask. And on the backups, the data retention, the ability to recover from a hack, make sure you know who has that ability to do the restore, to bring the business back online should something happen, and what that's going to look like. Ask the question, know for yourself, see it in action if possible, but really the more knowledge you can have on this topic, the more powerful you'll be in preventing it.
Awesome. And Dom, what's the final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
My final thoughts is for people to understand that the cybersecurity is, in my mind, it should be seen as a discipline of risk management. Like I said, yes, there's the IT operational aspects to it. Yes, IT fulfills it, but from a, if you're a CFO, director, your role and responsibility in all of that is to embrace it from a risk management discipline perspective. With any control that IT rolls out, ask, well, how does that actually reduce cyber risk for our organization? Security can be an extremely inefficient way of spending dollars, because there's a lot of old technologies that a lot of cash cows that people just invest in, but don't really think about how this actually addressing the cyber risk at our organization. So again, as a director, as a part of the finance team, as a part of the executive board, ask those questions, right? Again, focus on measurable risk reduction, understanding how any investment should be focusing on reducing risk in the cyber risk within the organization, but also as well in terms of understanding, is this control going to be preventing or mitigating risk? Is it going to allow us to detect earlier if a risk manifests itself, or is this control going to allow us to respond quickly and effectively should it get past the prevention and detection stage? So like I said, at the end of the day, we really embrace a risk management approach to this and not just, like I said, passing it off to IT.
Awesome. So with that, we're going to wrap up. I really want to thank you all again for the time and your insights. I think there's a lot of tangible takeaways that I have, and hopefully the group does as well. Just a reminder to everyone, we do give out CPD certificates, so that'll be coming over the next week or so from Nikki, so you'll have that opportunity. And we also will share some summary information, including the contact information of our panel. So if you need to engage them in further conversation or services, you can definitely do that. GamTech Fully Managed and Cyber SC do serve all size businesses, and they have a passion similar to Amplify for small, medium business, but they certainly serve every size business. So if you're in a medium or large or public company, don't feel precluded from this group of experts. And just like Amplify, if they honestly can't give you the services they need, they'll be certain to pass you to their friends that could. So it's important, and you do need that support if you don't have it internally, for sure. And we're very thankful to have all of these guys on speed dial when we need them. It's